Hi, everybody. This is Al. I am about 8.5 blocks from the Kelly Writers House, which, alas, is shuttered. But Philly is doing all right, and I get to run past the Writers House every once in a while. Hello, Writers House. But we are the Writers House. Writers House is mobile, and we have a bunch of friends here. Of course, it's week 10 in ModPo. This is our live webcast. I have a couple of announcements to make, but let me say hello to everybody. Gabe, hi. Hi, Gabe. Great Canon challenge. That was great. Anna may be doing some Sylvie work, but there's Anna. We have an Anna box. Amber Rose Johnson. Hello, Amber Rose. Dave Poplar, how are you? Lily Applebaum. It's good to see you as always. We see each other 3 times a week, but that's the way it should be. Allie Castleman. Hello, Allie in New York. Jake, hey. How many caps do you have? How many hats?
I lost count.
You have a lot, okay. And do you make choices, deliberate choices in the morning, or you just pick the one that the kids put on the floor?
I improvise.
You, that's great. And Max McKenna, hello, Max from Chicago. Jess, how are you? Davey, good to see you. Erica, there you are. Oh, this is great. And Chris Martin, who is handling the audio, which reminds me to tell you, everybody who's watching, please give us a call at 610-616-3208. You don't have to wait for us to stop doing the preliminaries to call. I mean, Chris will entertain you. Chris is at 610-616-3208. And if you want to Skype in, because it's cheaper or better for any reason, particularly if you're international, if you're outside the United States, it's Skyping at ModPo Pen, and that's PENN, ModPo Pen, 610-616-3208. And we have a very special guest. So this is the 3rd time, Derek, this fall that we've had a special guest come in. Actually, Jake was one of them. He didn't come in, and Gabe was one, so he didn't come in. But this is like legitimate special guest. Derek Beaulieu, it is so good to see you, friend. And you are right now in Banff, in the great province of Alberta. Is that correct?
It is. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invite, Al. I'm looking forward to the
very excited. I mean, I can't, it's hard to imagine a better interlocutor with the week 10 goings on. Davey, did I say hi to you? Hi, Davey. Sorry, I forgot to say hi to you. Or maybe I've said it twice. Okay, so we're going to assign ourselves, or I'm going to take volunteers for social media and a couple of announcements, and then we'll get started. So who is willing, Lily, to do Twitter? Great, thank you. And you're tweeting us at #ModPoLive, ModPo Live. Facebook, Amber Rose, are you game? Thank you so much. So for Facebook, all you have to do is go to Facebook or go to your favorite web browser and just type in Facebook ModPo, and you'll get to our group, our ModPo group. If you're not already a member, you should join that if you're a Facebook type of person. There are more than 10,000 people in the ModPo group, which is a little freaky. YouTube, Gabe, you willing? Okay, so if you're watching us, well, you probably are watching us, unless you're doing the audio stream only, which would make Chris Martin very happy. If you're watching us, you're watching on YouTube, and there should be a chat box below you. Some people have a problem getting to it. I think you have to sign in somewhat properly. I'm not even sure. But if you sign in properly, you can use that chat box, and Gabe will be watching it. And Anna is busy. Who wants to do the forum thread? Who's willing to do the forum thread? Davey, thank you so much. So right inside the ModPo site, in our discussion forums, there's a pinned thread, so you can't miss it if you just go to all the threads. I think it's called All Threads, and you'll see it there, and Davey will be watching. So, all right, quick announcement, and then we'll get started on week 10. We don't know where we're going to go with this discussion. It may be that Chris is already talking to somebody, so that's good. We've got a phone caller. Final words on Monday. So it's just a few days from now. It'll be our last live get-together. We might do one in the spring during Slowpo, just if the band wants to get back together, but no promises there. We're certainly going to be back in September of 2021, but who knows what the world is going to look like then. So this is your last shot at us live. The office hours will shut down. There'll be some Slowpo activity we'll probably talk more about slow po in announcements, course-wide announcements and during final words. But at 10:30 a.m. Philadelphia time, we realized for those of you who are to the west of us, by any definition to the west of us, it's going to be a little early. We apologize for that. It's kind of a traditional vestige of the 10:30 spot because we used to always have people come to the Writers' House to participate. We had to account for the Writers' House having other activities. Sometimes it was as late as Thanksgiving on the same day, but that's not happening this time. So 10:30 a.m., tune in. We'll send you the link. I already did send the link to everybody. And we will devote the entire webcast to just people saying hello, farewell, goodbye, and you can talk about what ModPo has meant to you, something you've learned. It may be that you want to say something about a poet you encountered in ModPo this time for the first time, or talk about one of the canon challenges. So please plan to do one of two things. One would be, well, one of three things. One would be to call us on that day live and say your final words. Another would be to go to a thread that I will post soon after this webcast, and I will pin it. And that thread will be a final words thread. So you can, anybody in ModPo, absolutely anybody, can post your final thoughts on the course, what it's been like to be part of an international poetic community. And the third way to do it, of course, is during the webcast to post to Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and the discussion thread. So there are three ways you can offer your farewells, and the easiest one is to go to the thread. And just to warm us up on farewells, I just want to read a couple of brief ones, and then we'll go to our discussion. It looks like someone's on the phone. Chris, is someone on the phone? I'm not looking at my chat. I'm so sorry. I should do that. Okay. Tell us who's on the phone, and then I'll read these final words.
Hey, Al. We
Hi.
have Chris Tids calling from the
Tids.
UK, and he said that you two had an email back and forth.
Yeah, Chris is really active. Yeah, Chris is well. Yeah. Before we bring Chris on, let me just quote a couple of early final words. One is from Wayne Gilbert, who's been a superstar. I think this is Wayne's first time in ModPo. Found a way to email us. I guess he emailed me directly. I want to thank you for making ModPo possible. I have enjoyed it. Even the poems that really make me scratch my head and ask, huh? There's a lot of huh going on, which is good, is what we want, right? Erica, that's the whole point of teaching, is to cause huh? Thank you for opening my world to so many forms of the art I love. So this Wayne is a poetry person, but who's encountering a different kind of poetry in ModPo, and that is the goal here, pedagogically, communitarianly, etc. And he concludes, and I look forward to learning even more, and Wayne will be coming back and staying, which is what we want everybody to do. And finally, Michelle Dobb, who came to my office hours this morning and wrote something very powerful, shared it with us, and I share it with you. Probably some of you have interacted with Michelle in the forums, been trying to keep up. Hi, my name is Michelle Dobb. I participated semi-actively through week 7, but had chronic anxiety issues due to my father's protracted unresolved will after 8 years. Got in the way of coloring everything I was doing, sadly, and I became super self-conscious. That was building anyway, and feeling guilty. But I also recently spent 6 hours with Lynn Heginian's My Life, which I love the fact that Michelle, in this particular situation, encountered my life. We could speculate on what the revelation was about. 6 hours of my life, which was revelatory and beautiful and hard work. I must thank you for the course. I laugh and feel so many emotions watching the discussions. You are all exceptional teachers and facilitators. I hope to ModPo plus and SlowPo. Those are verbs, by the way, ModPo plus and SlowPo. I hope to ModPo plus and to SlowPo. I think you are all very special. Thank you, Michelle Dobb. You are very special. Isn't that? It's great. It's great to encounter Michelle. All right, let's bring Chris Tids up and then see what Chris wants to talk about. So, Chris Martin, you got it? Hello, Chris.
We're live, Al.
Hi,
Hello.
Chris. Hi.
Hello, how do you do?
Great. You know, you're a superstar.
I wouldn't say that. And I know I gave you this problem in the middle of the course.
No, you're great. You are you've commented. I mean, you must have set the record this fall for the number of posts.
Surely not.
No,
That's
well,
nice. That's nice.
maybe not as many as I, but so do you have a comment or question, or you just wanted to say hi?
Well, I wanted to say hi and just to say quite what this course means to me. It's been absolutely tremendous, and I will never forget it. I've been taken on a journey, and it's a journey to a destination that at the beginning I didn't even know existed. And it's like having been taken on a magical mystery bus tour. Each example of the poets in their work seemed to have moved me from one transition to another, and yet there's been some kind of retrospective circularity in the poets building upon the predecessors and moving things onto new horizons. I loved Emily Dickinson for its intellectual challenge, but just as much, though unexpectedly, I really like Gertrude Stein, and I really like the Baroness. But I did have a down point in the course when I encountered Allen Ginsberg's Howl, and I articulated post to the subforum, mounted to a howl of my own, along the lines, where the heck is this going to? And where on earth are we going? To which I responded with a flurry of messages. I'm really glad I kept going, really am. And I've got a meta here, really. I go to football, and when I go to a football match, I like the whole experience, the replica shirt, the scarf, the beer on the train, the walk to the ground, and the excitement builds. And I so love Christian Bock's work, Unoya, Nasser Hussain skywritings, and Jordan Abel's absolutely wonderful The Place of Scraps, that they're all in order, and I've got that same feeling as excitement as approaching the football as waiting for them to come through my letterbox, and I can hardly wait. So it's just to say thanks, Sal, to yourself, the teaching assistants, the mentors, the backroom staff, and including Chris, the techie, for making it all possible. I really, really am grateful, and that's basically what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Chris. That was just wonderful. Watch everybody snap. You won't hear them all because some of them are muted, but look at all those snaps. Listen, we've not had a football chapter 9.3 analogy in a couple of years at least. But can I ask you one question, and then you'll hang up and we'll get another caller. So when you wrote that grumpy thing about Ginsberg, and I replied less grumpily, and did that? I'm curious to know. We had a good colloquy, but did that bother you that the big guy came in? I'm not a big guy, but supposedly big guy came in and wanted to defend. I don't know if I defended Ginsberg, but I asked you a few questions about how you might look at it. Did that annoy you? Should I stop doing that? I'm really curious.
No, it didn't, because part of the way I learn, I think, is by spending a lot of detailed analysis. So when the course says it'll take 8 hours, it takes me 16. That's been the average. I'm quite a detailed person, but I also learn, I think, in a way from challenging, and I was a bit worried that you wouldn't, in your august position compared to mine, that you might not accept a bit of a challenge. But it's not for the want of it. It's not for the purpose of me trying to be grand. But it's genuinely, I do learn from challenging, and I like people to convince me. So I thought the flurry of messages didn't intimidate me, and I thought I did come off with learning at the end of it, which was really my objective. Although I never expected one such as you to come on personally, I thought I'd probably be a mentor.
Thank you, Chris. Oh, I love everything you've said. Thank you for calling. And this is like a first final words message, but we're so glad to have it. And stay with us, please, through Slowpo, through the off season. And we'll be
I will indeed. I promise you that.
All right, there it is. Chris, thank you. Calling in from the UK. Wow, that was great. What I'd like to do, and the number is 610-616-3208. What I'd like to do is raise the question of translation generally, invite a few people to comment on this issue of translation in the poems of this week, or of generally the poetry of this ilk, this mode. And then as a second part of that, people, I'd like to ask a few of you to pick a stanza or a variation of Mike Magee's Flarfist Pledge, which is the homophonic translation of the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States flag. So there are two things going on here. One is an invitation to a few of you to talk about the issue of translation. I mean, obviously, Via, Caroline Bergvall is involved in that. I mean, most of the poets this week are thinking about translation. And then second is pledge. So I wonder if Derek and Gabe and Max would take a shot at the general question of translation and its relevance. Derek thinks about this all the time as an artist and practitioner. It's an easy peasy one for you. And then I'd like Allie, Lily, and Jess to, if you don't mind, to pick a stanza of Pledge, just to talk a little bit about it in relation to what Derek, Gabe, and Max say. So let's give Derek the floor first. Sorry, Derek, I sprung it on you, but can you talk generally about translation as a topic and as a mode in its relevance to this kind of poetry?
Sure. Thanks, Al. It's funny, but I kind of think that translation is, it's what we all do. It's what we're doing constantly in terms of poetry, not specifically conceptual writing or contemporary writing, but all poets are trying to look to move information from one form to another, right? They're always looking to move it from thought to word, or from action to, a sentence. And it's the pieces that get lost, and it's the excitement in what's the crumbs that fall off the sandwich along the way as you're trying to make this. And that's the thing that really excites me. The thing about translation to me, in terms of conceptualism or in terms of a contemporary practice, is that it introduces, or it reintroduces forms that that poets have been working on for a very long time. That, in terms of homophonic translation or translation by form, these go back. Zukovsky's doing this. This is not particularly new, but what conceptualism does is it takes a particular set of tools and says, let's focus on those ones for a while. Yeah. And translation is definitely one of them. And that's actually one of the things that I think makes conceptualism to me so interesting, is that it is very much engaged in an international scope. Right. There are writers around the world working in other languages, and the language barriers start to fall away really quick.
Yeah. So thank you, Derek. And we're going to turn to Gabe and then Max on this general question of translation. But what Derek has said, I'm sorry to simplify it or reduce it, but in effect, we shouldn't think of translation only as moving from one language to a next, done by a professional translator who knows the first language well and the second language well and moves it over for the purposes of elucidation. That translation is a fundamental tool. Yeah. Now, it is also true, because of its inherent internationalism, translation also is progressive. It is also border challenging. So you get back to the politics of translation by generalizing first. Derek, that was really great. Of course, you think about this all the time. Gabe, you think about translation all the time, and your recent poetry is dealing with it constantly.
Yeah, actually, I mean, that is true, but I feel like my answer is going to go pretty far afield from that. I was going to say that in A Midsummer Night's Dream, when Bottom becomes a donkey, Quince says to him, "Bless thee, thou art translated." And, that's a line that a lot of people love. And it's partly because the word translated there doesn't mean like, now you're in Spanish, my friend, but it means something like, there's something that's still you. It's still you, I think it is, at least. But now you're appearing in this different form. You're appearing in a new way. You're transformed. You're reborn. And I think I really agree with what Derek has said so far. And I would add also maybe a historical note that coming from the language poets on, there's a lot of history of experimental translation by amateur translation that's happening, where people are kind of, taking a dictionary and just doing what they can do with it, even if they don't really understand the language. And I think that kind of amateur translation, let me just see what I can do with the language, is really the same gesture as some of the more formal transformations, translations that we get in something like Via or Pledge, the homophonic translation or something like that. So.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Gabe. And Max, a third person on this larger question of translation, and then we'll turn to Allie, Lily, and Jess to see what it means for a flarfist to hear a translation. So Max?
I think what's particularly provocative about the question of translation in the context of this week, and I think this is going to be a version of what Derek said, is that you see these international communities of poets less interested in trying to convey something about content in their own language, and instead sharing these tools that are able to circulate regardless of language. Since, with the conceptual poets and the unoriginal poets here, we see them beginning from this conceptual starting point, from this place of constraint or a game or some sort of challenge that they set for themselves. And in fact, you can do that in any language. So the what happens here with translation is less that you're is language becomes less of a constraint where you're not trying to find the right words, but rather every language that you apply these tools to reveals something new about that language and also the tool that you're using in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. Lily, can you read a variation from Pledge and just comment briefly on how any of these general ideas bear out in that?
Definitely. Okay, I'm reading the second stanza if you're following along at home. High pledge a lesion to death egg, oft die unitely stains of a miracle, and too deep repugnant for withered spans, wan etching, unnerved dog, inapplicable with liver, tea, and just this for all.
What would you say about that?
I think as a American person who went to public school and said the Pledge of Allegiance every day, it's hard to read the poem the way that it's written as a homophonic translation, because I just like my lizard brain or whatever just wants to say the Pledge of Allegiance because I know that much better than what I'm reading. So it feels actually very unnatural to read it in a very effective way, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jess, can you pick out a variation and read it and comment?
Sure. I've selected 13. My friend Stephen, tofuti bag over mitt-lighted stinks of a measuring cup, and tutoring Bobby for 50 claims, 1 eggplant, undercooked and uneatable, with liverwurst and just this for all.
What do you think?
Well, I have to say the word tofuti kind of drew me in there.
You had me at tofuti.
Yes, it had me at tofuti. And I liked the way that this particular iteration was sort of like leaning into the feminized vocabulary of the domestic, which of course is like very enmeshed in like patriotism, and discourses of patriotism, but yet both of those things are like rendered completely unrecognizable here. And like the processed imitation non-dairy ice cream product that is tofuti, sort of like wonderfully concretizes, like what's being done here.
I love it.
the translated dairy dessert, if you will.
That's great. That's what you said was in the spirit of Flarf, and we won't go into defining Flarf, but it's easily defined in the course and you can get there. Allie, what's your choice and what would you say about it?
My choice was going to be 13 as well, but I can talk about one. First, just with 13, just the way that it reduces the grandeur of what you think the Pledge of Allegiance is talking about is so wonderful and kind of subversive. It's this kind of gross, to me, seeming meal that's being concocted. So that's good. But I also like how just kind of addressing what Lily's saying, whereas like if you know the Pledge of Allegiance, it's so hard to get your mind away from that. And I do think that Mike Magee kind of progresses this poem in a way where it's the straightest homophonic translation in stanza 1. I plug elegance to thee frag of Dionysus states of America, in tune theory public for widgets hands, one day shun, on dirge odd, ring the busy bell with lip hurting and justice for all. So we kind of, in that stanza, we can kind of do both things at once. Like we're kind of still saying the Pledge of Allegiance while just seeing these other words with our eyes. And that's a kind of almost like massaging, so that by the time that you get to 2:13 and 16, we're ready to kind of get into the flarf and silliness of fun of it and kind of leave the Pledge of Allegiance behind.
Fantastic. Thank you all. The number is 610-616-3208. Chris, do we currently have a call?
We do have a call, Al, if you're ready for it.
I think so, yeah.
We have our friend Alison B calling from California on the line right now.
Hello, Alison.
Hey, Al. Plot twist. I know I was at your office hour this morning,
Yeah, and
so
you
I
said
figured I'd just ride through the morning.
That's great. You got up early for that. That would have been 5:30 a.m. your time, I think.
Yeah, I was up a little bit before that, and I thought, you know what? I wish I could have made it for the Zoom office hour, but
yeah,
this was the week that it hit me.
I think next year, Allison, I'm going to do my office hour on a day other than Webcast day, because I would love to do Zoom office hours every week, but it's a little tiring to do the Zoom office hour and then the Webcast. But thank you. That was fun. You also said you were going to come to Final Words, but here you are today.
I will. Yeah. I think I'll double whammy it. Why not?
Cool.
Pack it in right at the end.
Can I subvert whatever question you were going to ask and ask you to be one of the commentators on a question I'm about to ask?
Sure.
Great. I knew you'd be game because you always are. All right. So what I'd like to do is ask Alison, Erica, Jake, Davey, and Derek again, but you got to be quick because that's a lot of you. Just a quick thought on the whole question of mishearing. And I say mishearing, of course, I put it in quotes, at least the prefix is in quotes. Jake, it takes me back to that wonderful anecdote from your own prose in the middle of your new book of poetry about someone making a noise outside of a place where music is being made. And in a sense, it's a translation. It's also a deliberate and intentional, productive, generative mishearing. And I guess it's Erica, Jake, Davey, Alison, and Derek. I want you all to say quickly what can be generative and productive about mishearing. You could mean it, you could think about it in the Freudian sense of the psychopathology of everyday life. You could think about how we deliberately get involved in parapraxis of sound, and how it's sometimes good to not hear what someone is saying, but to kind of take it, make it your own. Thoughts, any kind, anywhere, but brief. Erica, would you go first on mishearing?
Yeah, I think that mishearing is really a new kind of hearing, in that it really, it opens one up to all kinds of new meaning making and new ways of thinking about language use.
Yeah, that's great. That's beautiful and wonderfully succinct. Jake?
Yeah, I'm thinking about my kids who are productively and subversively mishearing me, or sometimes like twisting words. What'd you say? Like as a kind of like playfulness and twisting of language. It's a lot of fun.
Along the lines of what about go clean your room aren't you hearing? Is that what you mean?
Should I get in the go-kart and that kind of thing?
I love it, Jake. Thank you. Talk about the psychopathology of everyday life. Davey, mishearing?
Two quick thoughts. One, to challenge the ableism of the frame of mishearing, to think about mishearing as not necessarily related to auditory information, but to think about mishearing expansively, and then to also think about mishearing as non-universalizable, as not universally accessible.
Yes.
And then additionally to also think about, if we're thinking about mishearing expansively as a way of playing with or refusing predetermined forms of meaning, to think about it as in the Magee poem as an opportunity to refuse language, to refuse the unimpeachability of language, and to put pressure on how language is interpreted, what it means, what its histories are, to rewrite those, and to have mishearing as a playful way in to think about the constructiveness of language.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Of course, such a good point. I've been thinking, Davey, about a convergence I've been starting to see. I don't know that much about either, but disability studies and the new sound studies, particularly Black sound studies, this idea of blur as creative, right? The blur of the sound and music, particularly with improvisational music. So I love the way that is starting to come together, so that poetry as sound is thought of as liberated by what you're supposed to hear, damn it. So I think that's really great. Alison, have you been hearing all this?
Yes. I haven't. I hope I haven't been mishearing it.
Very nice. Do you want to say something about the topic of mishearing?
Well, sure. I mean, I came into this via translation, listening to the beginning of the conversation, and I had to just add in, and this does fit with mishearing, that my husband is a third English language is his third language, and Polish is his first language. And we have a lot of mishearing and a lot of translation happening all the time in our household, you know? And what I wanted to offer was that, one, I think mishearing and translation, both of them, but mishearing is what we're focused on, can often identify intention or identify what someone wants to hear. And I also think that mishearing should be taken with humor, because I think sometimes we can mishear things and often be frustrated because we don't feel heard. But the mishearing can, you know, like I said, very much for us in our house, it brings a lot of jokes.
That is so great. I love what you just said, Alison. And as I turn to Derek on this, it puts me in mind of a conversation that Gabe and I were having in the poetry reading a few weeks ago, where I asked him about his interest in Ricky Ricardo and the parapraxis of Ricky and Lucy mishearing Ricky. Sometimes the mishearing on the part of Lucy was a comic way for the plot to move forward, because Ricky said one thing and she misheard it and winds up doing a whole thing. But often Ricky was like the first one to admit somebody's chatting about how they love Lucy. That was really about a kind of deliberate mishearing that was making a marriage and making a relationship. Yeah. And it goes along with what Alison was saying. Alison,
well,
I'm gonna say thank you and bye-bye till Monday, so we can get another call in, but you were great and you went with the flow. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, just one final thing is that when I married Kamil, people told me that I would have the best marriage because it would always have a lot of humor because of our translations and mishearings.
Can you think of a quick example of the mishearing that turned out to be so fabulous?
Oh, that is really tough. I will pull one for Monday. I'll leave you in a plot twist for Monday.
All right, great. Thank you, Alison. You're the best. Thank you for being a ModPo citizen.
Thank you.
That's great. 610-616-3208. Chris I think the line is free because he's not chatting away with someone. Derek, mishearing?
I think this is a really interesting conversation here, because as the only person I think on the panel who's not American, I don't know the Pledge of Allegiance. I have no idea. I know the first sentence because, you know, you hear it on TV shows or something. So there's, in this particular poem, the humor comes from an assumed knowledge, and that assumed knowledge is connected to a nationalism, right? That of course you have that base to start with, and that the humor and the poetics comes from challenging and undermining what the author, what Magee I think in this particular case, assumes that you all know, that we all know, and that we starts shaking in interesting ways. So when I read these, I know the rhythm of the Pledge of Allegiance, but I don't know the words. So when I read the poems, I identify with the rhythm. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds like the Pledge of Allegiance, but I don't really know where the words are being torqued in particularly problematic ways.
Yeah, which just underscores the whole idea that each subject comes to any kind of sound text with their own history of having heard the sound. So they get to do very productive things with it. Great. So Amber Rose, Dave, and Anna, I would like to spring something on you. It is the Walt Whitman piece by Nasser Hussain. I'm going to do a screen share of it, and then we'll talk about it for a second. Of course, I just opened it up and now I can't see. Zach, can I screen share? It's disabled. Zach, will you permit me to screen share? Somebody might want to put the link in our chat to the Nasser Hussain. Zach must be paying attention to something else. So I'm going to read it. Still can't do it. Zach, you need to give me screen sharing, please. I'm going to read it aloud. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go to something else. Let's go to the Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and forum thread. So Gabe, what do we got going in YouTube?
Well, right now people are having fun talking about misheard lyrics. But earlier people were really into our translation conversation. And I wanted to shout out actually something that came earlier in the conversation, but is so relevant, which was just some love for Carolyn Bergvall's via, especially that audio recording. I think it was Juliet Vandermolen who was talking about how there's almost like a desire not to leave the forest once you're in that hypnosis of the audio recording. So yeah.
That's great, thank you. Lily, what's happening on Twitter?
It's still pretty quiet on Twitter, although, let me see. Ton has put their, I almost said weekly photo of their dog Kex in Twitter. So Def, go there for a dose of cute. But Ton also offered this, which I'm going to read as a contribution to the mishearing conversation. Ton says, as a deaf person, mishearing brings new meaning and honestly, sometimes better meaning potentially, but it also isolates and throws me out of conversations quite often. So snaps to Davey, let's challenge the meaning of the word.
That's fantastic, thank you. And Facebook, Amber Rose Johnson?
No questions or comments in Facebook, just some friends saying hi, and I am trying to convince Mandana to form a question about kinship, translation, and relation.
Okay, great, Mandana, go for it. And the forum thread, that would be Davey.
A couple of thoughts. One, a question from our wonderful pal, John Sanchez, asking about pledge and shorter American memory of the Declaration of Independence in the context of the election, to ask us to think about those poems in this particular moment. And a wonderful question from Stephanie Hammer, who asks, where can poetry go after unoriginality? What possible directions might it take in our opinions?
Yes, that would be week 11. So I guess ModPo 2021 needs to have an 11th week. That would kill us, but certainly that it is time for week 11. Thank you, Stephanie. And also John Sanchez, who, by the way, I had a long, email exchange with him about school and university and life and COVID, and it was really great to get to know John. Okay, so the number is 610-616-3208. I'm gonna screen share now that Zach has permitted me to do so. And let's see how well it goes. All right, Derek, would you mind reading it? You're a friend, Nasser Hussain, and I'm sure you've heard him do this. So would you do it?
Sure, happy to. So this is from Skywritings by Nasser Hussain. Page 68 is for Walter Whitman. Me, barbaric yop. Me.
That was great, Derek. And even you know, Nas has the Canadian accent from our ears, and you even reproduce that. Okay, so Amber Rose, Dave, and Anna, thoughts on, this is a great full circle situation for us in ModPo, because we started with Whitman, and now here's Nasser Hussain using airport codes to rewrite Walt. So what are your thoughts? Let's start with Dave. What are your thoughts, Dave? And are you cold there in Arizona? You're wearing gloves and stuff.
Yeah, it's about 60 degrees here in my office.
Oh boy.
The air
Poor
conditioning's on. Yeah, Arizona has this big man or human versus nature thing that's like a chip on its shoulder, because everything in the desert wants to kill you. So everywhere we go, we express our superiority over nature.
Wow. We could talk about that for an hour, but go ahead and talk about Walt.
Actually, I have a thought about, in a sense, I wonder if that's sort of the same dynamic that's going on in the week 10 poets, now that it's on the table, but just the sense that, you know, these poets are looking through the environment to try to be human, to try to make it their own. And in a sense, like that's like a human drive that's exemplified here in Arizona by what we're trying to do, you know, with conquering nature. Anyway, putting that aside, I do love the Walt Whitman poem. What
do you think he's saying about Whitman?
Well, it's in a sense, it's almost like the poem making fun of William Carlos Williams in a fun way. It's poking fun at them, like bringing to the surface some of their subtle personality, I don't know, flaws, just their self-indulgence, bringing that to the surface for all to see, but in sort of a respectful way that pays honor to it. In a sense, in my view, it's a great summary of Leaves of Grass in general.
I love using airport codes, 3-letter codes, to find a summary. Would somebody, while I turn to Anna and Sylvie, would somebody look up the 3-letter airport code that he uses, MEE? I have no idea where that is, but it might actually edify us. Anna, what do you think of this? You were in on that conversation with Nas, I remember.
I had the great pleasure of hanging out with Nas in person, both in Montreal and then in the Wexler studio. So it was awesome.
Right.
I mean, one of the really interesting subtexts in this poem is the idea of travel, and how travel is something that is a little bit troubled for Nas, in the sense that he is not always able to just like pick up and go wherever he wants without facing like TSA security theater, TSA in the United States, and I'm sure security theater elsewhere in other airports. So part of that subtext for this Walt Whitman poem, Song of Myself, being a poem that involves a lot of Walt Whitman's travels throughout America, going places whenever he wanted, wherever he wanted,
wow.
Country. You know, I'm the poet who can just, you know, sort of traipse around and gallivant and, you know, go wherever I want and do whatever I want. And, you know, it's about me and it's about my America through my eyes, even though it does this kind of democratic gesture of inviting everyone into the poem. I think there are some serious cracks in that attitude. And I think part of what this poem is doing is not only making fun of Walt Whitman's, you know, centering of himself in America, but also reminding us, hey, your vision of America, as much as you want to make it available for all of us, is not.
Yeah, that's really such a terrific reading. And in a way, it couples the Nasser Hussain piece with the Divya Victor piece in a way, because it turns out, as Amber Rose Johnson tells us, the airport is in New Caledonia, which is, you know, a place Walt would have considered to be, you know, in the Orient or Oriental or something like that, in a racist sense. So it's perfect that it's so far away. Me is the American Walt is so far away. Amber Rose, what are your thoughts about this?
I love everything that Anna just said, and so I'm not sure that I have anything better to add because what a great reading. Yeah, I actually don't want to try to quickly come up with something. I just want to reinforce Anna's reading.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Ambrose. Why don't we start with you in response to Stanley, who's on the phone from New Mexico. See whatever Stanley comes up with. We'll start with Ambrose. So, Chris, you want to bring Stanley up?
Sure thing. Stanley is on the line now.
Hi,
All
Stanley.
right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but can you hear me?
Oh, absolutely. Is this Stanley Del Gozo?
Yes, Stanley Del Gozo from Deming, New Mexico. I missed your office hours because I've been having things to do at that time.
Oh, that's
But,
next year I'll make them a little later. It's good to hear you. How are you?
Well, I'm really good. Either later or earlier. You know, earlier is good too.
Oh, that would kill me though. But anyway, well, you get up really early. What are you doing this early in the morning? You have projects?
Well, right now my dog is on hospice, and I have the night shift.
Oh.
And I get up and I read to her, and then she writes with me, and I usually try to write early in the morning, and because that's the best time. Anyway,
I'm so sorry.
That's Anna's. Well, she's 19 years old.
Yeah, that's a long
so
life.
we voted for her to have hospice. Anyway, first I want to say that was Anna that was just on with her baby.
Yes.
Wow. There's a delay here, and I'm looking at the screen, and I don't.
Oh, don't look at the screen. It'll only confuse you, but that was Anna. Yeah.
Okay. And her baby is absolutely beautiful. And, you know, that's part of, in the 5 years that I have been hanging out with ModPo, I've watched all the TAs grow. And just this year, I learned that you have the bios of all the TAs in the resources.
It's true. Yeah.
And I read them all last week, and I said, wow, like Davey, I didn't realize, not Davey, the guy in Tucson, what's your name?
Dave Poplar? Dave, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Deming, so I'm, just a couple hours away from him, and I was thinking we could get together sometime.
Hey, yeah, meet up.
Anyway, what my thing has been is all my life I've been a translator and writer and linguist, and I love ModPo, by the way, because I've never spent so much time studying poetry as I do with ModPo, and that's really exciting to me. But I remember translations. See, translating, you can really get screwed up in translating, because I remember clear one of my first translation classes, they had a sentence called, it was, I saw the girl with the telescope under the tree by the beach. Now, to try to put that into Russian or Turkish or German is incredibly difficult, because, I saw the girl with the telescope under the tree by the beach. It sounds like something that a 10th week person would try to put into a poem. But anyway, my whole joy with ModPo is getting in touch with a few of the people that are ModPo mentors, like Raymond Maxwell, who's I've been in contact with for about 10 years now.
Yes. Yeah.
And you had him as a guest cameo, 2 weeks ago on the discussion group, one of the discussions.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wouldn't miss the ModPo live discussions for anything.
Thank you, Stanley. It's really great to hear from you. And would you please, I don't know, you're comforting your dog. What's your dog's name?
My dog's name is Yoshi, which means little star, and she's got a little star.
Well, you're comforting your little star. Will you comfort your little star, whether it's scratched behind the ears or petting for us? And really appreciate your call. And I hope you'll join us for the Final Words webcast on Monday.
I will. Now, I want to know what MEE stands for with the...
You must.
airport.
Yeah, you must have missed it in the delay. It's refers to an airport in New Caledonia. Yeah. Thank you, Stanley.
Okay.
Thank you for calling. Have a great day and be well. Okay. Take care.
Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you. 610-616-3208. What I'd like to do, Amber Rose, Gabe, and Jake, is to share a screen of 2 pages from the remarkable Jordan Abel. It's a new piece in ModPo main syllabus called The Place of Scraps. And it uses erasure. And I guess I want to invite, for starters, the 3 of you to just talk about the strategy of erasure in general. You can specifically refer to the pages I'm going to show, but I'd like and probably more than the 3 of you, to really contemplate why erasure can be such a positive strategy rather than what might be typically or logically assumed, that it's a negative strategy, that it's an elimination, but it winds up being very creative. So here's one page. I'm going to share screen. There's one page. So this is the result of an erasure of the ethnography, the famous early 20th century Western Canadian ethnography of Marius Barbeau. There's one. And the other is here. These are the words of a page. I have seen the page, the original, and this is what's left after a certain amount of erasure. An account. Hey, Derek, would you read this one for us too?
Sure, that won't take too long. An account or summary was to be carved from Alaska.
Fantastic. Now, I know I showed that very quickly, and I don't expect Amber Rose, Gabe, and Jake to have very specific things, unless you have that text in front of you to say. They're generally interested in this whole thing of erasure and why it might help, why it might support Jordan Abel's project, which is to critique, among other things, the liberal, racist, liberal, and possibly well-intentioned, that's arguable, ethnography of the early 20th century. Amber Rose, what are your thoughts about erasure?
I think erasure is an interesting poetic strategy because what it's doing is sort of making at once making an argument and revealing something, which is that the sort of network of grammar holds together and conceals some of the power dynamics that undergird language.
Right.
And thinking about where we started at the beginning of, or actually thinking about Gabe's canon challenge this week, and that the subjectivity of the author is always present in the text. What erasure does is pull back some of the distractions and create a sharp way to sort of see into a text from a very particular angle. So it's highlighting very specific things in hopes that what is revealed in relationship to the original text can make a commentary about power and about what is working on sort of the lower registers, of language or of a particular text.
That is just so great. I'm so glad we recorded these things, because that was just, I'm not going to ask you to repeat it, but I will rewatch it. It puts me in mind of the situation that you and a bunch of us are in, where we read blocks of prose, critical, theoretical prose, and sometimes it's so authoritative and so overwhelming that we take a yellow highlighter or a pen and we pick out. We're doing essentially not so much erasure as extraction of the things that mean something to us, and we wind up making a block of critical or theoretical prose, which can be very intimidating, into something that works for us. And I think erasure then turns out to be a kind of way of studying. And Ambrose, your comment suggested that a block of text, in this case, Marius Barbeau's text, which is meant to sort of overwhelm you with his authority, his ethnographic authority, has a kind of unconscious. If we can just disclose that, then the thing he didn't quite mean can be pulled out, which is a version of what you were saying. I want to turn to Gabe and Jake, but I also want to queue up Erica and Derek. And I'm going to assume that Erica and Derek, I hope it's not wrong, have done in your course of teaching innovative poetry that you've done some erasure, either teaching erasure or using it as a tool for writing. So I'm going to turn to you about the pedagogy of erasure. But first, Gabe and Jake. Gabe, erasure generally, or this project specifically?
I want to say two quick things. So the first is, so I think what Amber Rose said is really great and a really useful short summary of the appeal of erasure for a lot of people. I think I would reword one thing though, which is I think what Amber Rose is saying is that it both brings out an implication and makes an argument for a particular kind of implication by retaining the set relations of a text grammar while also getting rid of some material. I think what I would say, and this is a very slight variation, is that sometimes it only looks like it's bringing out an implication of the text. As in, an erasure tries to make an argument that looks like it's not an argument, but is actually just a natural feature of the text that has now been revealed. So sometimes its gesture of reveal is actually a gesture of argument, but it looks like reveal because of the technique. So, so that's what I'd say. The second thing that I want to say is I want to mention the great popularity of the erasure form. I mean, this is a thing, one, that anybody can do, two, that a lot of people do. You know, it's something that can happen without, you don't need a book form for it. It can happen online. It can happen at the micro scale. It can happen on a freaking meme JPEG, you know, like this is something that can happen at all levels and that a lot of people do. And I'd say that the erasure, especially post 1950, has become a really popular form of experimental writing. So it feels experimental, but it's actually it's incredibly common. It's incredibly easy to do. And actually, I'd kind of recommend it to anybody to just try with some text that you want to do something to. I always think if something pisses you off, you can kind of erase pieces of it and see what happens to it.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I want to turn to Jake, and then Anna wants to add something, and then I want to turn to Erica and Derek to talk about the pedagogy. Jake?
Yeah, two quick thoughts. One is I'm remembering what my friend poet Adina Karasik said about erasure, and the way that
we're talking about Canadians.
Oh, true. So she talked about it as ghosts that are haunting the text. So you can erase your way down to them. So there are all these counter narratives that are whose past lives are haunting the text. And I thought it's a lovely metaphor, just beautiful metaphor that, I think goes back to what Amber Rose was saying, very much those grammar structures or whatever that Adina called ghosts. I love that. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, Gabe, I agree with you about popularity of erasure poetry, the blackout poetry. And I really enjoyed teaching it in class because this is where, when students would work through poems and erase parts of them and then present, it was really kind of special to witness a sense of process that would be there at the presentation of a text, of erased down text, that I don't know. I mean, anytime a poem is presented, the process is in there, but I guess it feels a little more tangible when somebody is presenting a poem that they have erased. There's just almost like an aura of process that is there at the presentation, and to me that felt special, and that felt different and memorable.
Thank you, Jake. Turn to Anna for a quick addition to this. The number is 610-616-3208. We'd love to take one more call. Anna, what's your thought?
So my thought is that I totally agree with Gabe and Jake in the sort of popularity of the erasure form, and that it's maybe feels a little bit less fresh as an experiment. However, what I do think this particular erasure really adds is Sorry, Sylvie's having some fun on the floor over here. Hanging out in her little activity area. What I do think that Jordan Abel's particular erasure really adds is a new sort of calling attention to the process of erasure in the sense of what has been erased. The original source text for this is its own kind of erasure because it's a text about a First Nations culture that's written by a white person, in a sense performing its own sort of act of erasure. And so Jordan Abel is kind of flipping that process on its head by saying, well, let's be attentive to what has been erased already.
Right.
And then use this poem as a way to kind of extract and reinvigorate that text and completely flip it as much as is humanly possible by working with the source text. And he does that especially not just by erasing, but by continuing to add the attribution of Marius, whatever the last name is, I can't recall it off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Barbeau, thank you. By continuing to add that attribution rather than oh, look, I made this new poem out of a source text. It's no. It's the erasure that's been done.
Right. No, I think that's a really important point. And also just a little, couple of footnotes. We've done, ModPo is an anthologizing gesture. So we've made it problematic just by picking a couple of pages. I picked a couple of pages, and then when we were in Seattle, Amarath Borsuk and I talked about it. So we were fine doing excerpts, but the thing to do is to go right after this webcast to your favorite bookseller and buy the Place of Scraps and look at the whole thing, and you'll get a better sense of the Barbeau situation, and also about Jordan's own personal story. And also I'd recommend Sarah Dowling. I know that Sarah did at least a chapter in her dissertation, which became a book. I haven't seen the book, but I assume it's in there. Another Canadian, and from Regina, Saskatchewan. And I would highly recommend Sarah's work on Jordan Abel. So there we go. All right, Derek and Erica, starting with Erica, you've taught erasure, what happens. Your teaching is very extensive, Erica. That is, you reach out to populations that don't typically have access to higher education. So I imagine you see this as a democratizing process. So would you say something about that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because this week and last week, we did in my class a lot of work with erasure, actually. And there are two different ways that I think it can be useful, particularly in the kind of class I'm teaching where I have students from all over the world. So the first way that we looked at erasure was to use erasure as a way to make new sense, almost as a reading comprehension tool, where you see what remains when you get rid of all the things that are getting in the way of your comprehension.
Yeah.
And then, and I tend to do that with more theoretical texts. We used a chunk of Benedict Anderson's Imagine Community to erase as we're trying to problematize what it means to define a nation. The other way that I use it is to invite students to set an intention and create something that reveals a story that wouldn't otherwise be visible. So Norbese Phillips' work is very important to me, particularly Zong, where she talks about excavating and bringing back stories that we don't have. And last week, in response to the election, I invited my students to find some kind of text that was a speech. And it didn't have to be from the US, but, and then figure out what you're going to think about erasing. What do you want to discover by way of erasure? And then play around with erasing the text, and then what's the poem that remains? And they did some really fascinating things. One student worked with a bunch of Obama speeches, another student looked at transcripts of the debate, but across the board, it felt as though we were able to see things in political rhetoric that otherwise just get buried. And they're things that are really, really important and things that affect civil rights and, you know, our basic conditions of like how we live.
So it's the process can be in the educational sphere, it can be self-disclosure as opposed to teachers disclosing for you. It can be self-archiving, that is to say, archiving enabled by an activity of a learner, right? So all that stuff that a good teacher traditionally is thought to do, which is I deliver unto you a way of disclosing the real meaning of this book that we have just read and are discussing.
Yeah.
Erasure is one of those strategies that allows learners to figure out what's, as Amber Rose was implying, what's not being said or what's hard to find. You get to do the hard work of finding it. I think that's great. Derek, I assume you've used it in your teaching, but in any case, what's been your experience?
I have. Most of my teaching with Erasure has actually occurred at arts colleges. So I'm teaching creative writing to art students. And I usually start with a text like Tom Phillips' A Humament, which is this huge classic example. But what students often take for that is the sense of play and the sense of decoration. And as you move from something like Tom Phillips into more politically charged texts, whether that be Nets by Jen Bervin, or Zong by Norbezi Phillips, or Jordan Abel's Place of Scraps, you start moving out of the newspaper blackout playfulness of like, hey, look, I found a fart joke in this newspaper, into something that's much more tangible and much more charged.
You just said a fart joke? F-A-R-T?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Like you'll often see those kind of things as just as a way of like, wow, look what you can find. And as you move past that into, wait a minute, there's actually a voice here that I can assert, whether that be a feminist voice or a queer voice or a voice of color. And that's where you start seeing students, that's the aha moment, where it's not just a joke, it becomes something else.
Yeah.
And I find it very liberatory for students because the act of having to create a poem, they don't have to create a poem, they just have to find it. Just walk through this text and point at the things that you think are assertive.
Thank you, Derek. I believe Chris is talking to someone on the phone. I'm not sure, and I don't know if Chris can hear me, but I would like to give the floor in turn to Max, Allie, Lily, Jess, and Davey. Not sure what the topic is going to be. Chris is definitely talking to someone on the phone. Can someone get Chris's attention? Max, you're going to be up first. Chris Martin? Yeah, he's just having a good time talking to a pal of his. Maybe he's just talking to his bank. I don't know. Max, can you choose a week 10 text? Let's say Erica Baum, Tracy Morris, Christian Buck, one of those three that we haven't talked about today, and just toss out an encouragement as to why people should engage with one of those texts.
Sure. I would encourage people to engage or spend a lot of time with Tracy Morris's text on the syllabus this week, which I think this is the one that I've been thinking about the most this week, this year, for different reasons. I think her performance is just astonishing. It's really incredible. It ties together so much in the course for us around questions of sound and also repetition, the way that repetition can function to sort of shake off meaning, this sort of accrued meaning that gets just all these associations that are stuck in our everyday use of language, which is just, it's kind of another version of what we're talking about with the erasure here, where we treat language materially, and we see language as kind of almost this force that can sometimes gather itself around itself to sort of protect itself or project something other than what it could be understood to be projecting. And so with Tracy Morris's piece, this repetition of this line, it all started when we were brought here as slaves from Africa. I mean, when it sounds like such a school book thing, and that's sort of the point, right? And you hear that, and I feel like that's something, I heard something almost as oversimplified and potentially inane when I was a kid in school. And when you just spend time like actually listening to that phrase over and over and over again, there's so much of the violence and the horror of that situation finally comes to the surface.
Right. And it's a version of the, and in quotes, mishearing we were talking about earlier.
Sure.
If you do enough close listening, you'll get there. We have Ton on the phone. So I'm going to ask Allie, Lily, Jess, and Davey, maybe not all four of you, but I will promise to give you the floor to respond to whatever issue Ton raises. So Chris, would you bring Ton up, please? Ton, hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing my best. I'm trying.
All right. Well, I was going to say we're
hang
here.
in there.
I was going to say we're here for you, but I don't know what here means anymore. How's Kex doing? Is Kex giving you lots of cheer?
Oh, he is doing great. He is a poor Victorian orphan who is tragically unfed, apparently, according to him, which is delightful to see. So he is, as always, just a joy to be around, and makes me feel deep shame for not giving him everything.
Well, you're a joy for us to be around. I'm not sure I worded that exactly right, the
Thank
word
you.
order, but you're around joy us. Anyway, Ton, I have invited Allie, Lily, Jess, and Davey to respond to whatever the heck you say. So you have the floor. And then I just want to do a program note. What we're going to do is we're going to look, after that, we're going to look quickly at a piece by Derek, actually, a concrete poem. And then we're going to do final words. So we're going to be wrapping up soon, Ton. So don't give us anything giant, because we'll never finish it. But just what do you have in mind? What are your thoughts?
Okay, so I have to admit I haven't really read as much as I wanted to for this week, so I cannot necessarily contribute to the conversation. But something that I have kind of caught myself on when I was reading erasure poetry is that erasure poetry is like one particular type of poetry that I'm most excited to use in my teaching, but I'm also most scared to actually try myself. So I guess my question is, I have two, maybe. One, especially I know that with Erica, we have like been for years on the forums discussing teaching and how to use poetry in teaching, and I teach English. So for students for whom English is a second language, how I guess how could one use erasure poetry in that, and what could it bring? What it could like bring up maybe new in the poem? Because I know that in the past, what I have kind of come across fear of new interpretations and of like trying to actually interpret the piece, especially like, where I'm from, where, the voice of the author is the voice of God. And the second question is, how does one, I guess, stop fearing actually messing with the narrative that already exists?
Wow, I love both those questions. Ton, those are great. And in fact, you've done such a great job. You should be managing this webcast. Would you come to Philly next year and co-host? Because what you did is you tied together the conversation we were having earlier about translation to the conversation we've been having about erasure, which really makes week 10 incredibly coherent. So there you go, ModPo at its best. Our friend from Siberia winds up teaching the course. I love it. Would you say goodbye and hang up and listen to us on air? That sound okay?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, Ton.
Okay, bye-bye, guys. And
bye,
see
bye,
you
love
next
you.
week.
Yep, see you next week.
Thank you.
Wow, Ton is the best. I mean, Ton just did it. Okay, so Allie, Lily, Jess, and Davey, real quick, respond to anything that, you can respond to the technical question, but I love that second one, which is, or there's an implicit one in the first question, which is, I have my students do it, but I'm afraid to do it. Maybe that's one you want to take up. Allie first, then Lily.
I hope to kind of at least glance off the question. But I think in addition to this notion of the source text kind of containing ghosts that get revealed through erasure and through that type of distilling, I also think it's true that through erasure, we reveal or make plain the truth about the sociability of all language and writing.
Nice.
And so if you're encountering a fear of like messing with the narrative, I think it's like really helpful to just remember that the erasure as a form is just a really literal representation of what we're literally always doing in any sort of writing, which always involves framing and editing, and making choices and erasing everything that you're not talking about, right?
Yeah.
So like in every writing, every time that we sit down to write anything, what we don't write, what we ignore, what we leave out, the white space is as important as what we actually do write. So I think thinking about just the nature, like thinking about erasure as like a social act and as a conversation like the rest of writing can maybe just for yourself just give you license to be a voice. You know.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allie. Lily, Jess, and Davey, would you all be brief? But I want to hear your response.
I'm thinking about the ESOL teaching component of Tan's question and erasure, because a big part of learning another language does actually involve erasure or fill in the blank type of exercises that I think students can find really confusing because they seem very unnatural. Like, you know, I blank to the store and you have to conjugate the verb correctly to fit into the blank or whatever. So I think that there's a lot of, there could be a lot of powerful like meta instructional moments around like getting students to make poetry out of these blank sentences, or like writing erasure, like fill in the blank exercises that don't actually work in the language or something. Because like making a grammatically wrong sentence is like contributing to your learning of a new language as much as it is to try to get a perfect like 10 out of 10 on the grammar worksheet.
Right. Yes, in dealing with a new language, if you're not making a mistake, you're making a mistake. You really want to encourage that kind of learning. Jess and Davey, very briefly each.
Sure. I was struck by the second question, which, to paraphrase, was, I believe, how do we stop hearing the same narratives or the narratives that we're trying to erase or change or rethink? And this made me think about the ways in which erasure is also like a refusal to reproduce something, like a refusal to reproduce coherency or a coherent narrative. And so perhaps, you know, one sort of rudimentary answer to that question of how do we stop hearing the same narratives is to like question what makes those narratives coherent, what made those narratives coherent in the first place. And also like Max, I think Max went away. Max mentioned Tracy Morris's performance. And I think like, I just want to offer that as like an answer to the question also.
Fantastic.
The verb hearing, right? And the specificity of that.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time just talking about the whole question of coherence and what it means. Before we turn to Davey, there's much talk about Sylvie's hat. Erica, do you have anything to do with this hat?
Yeah, it's my my new hobby.
You made that hat for Sylvie?
I sure did.
What is that? What's the action on the top? I can't quite tell. Is that a mad cat?
No, it's a little unicorn.
Oh, it's a unicorn. Sorry. Does Sylvie like that? Because, you know, her ears are being bent back, I think. Not now.
All better. We love it. Thank you, Erica. Thank you.
That's so great. Thank you, Erica. That's such a sweet ModPo gift giving. You got to love it. Davey, quick response to Ton, and then we're going to turn to a concrete poem by Derek.
Yep. I just want to, by way of answering Tom's question, amplify something I learned from Erica, what feels like a million years ago, but was probably about 8 years ago. In 2012, when I took a class with her for the first time, literally in a different lifetime, which is to do exercises with your students that, and something that's really changed my teaching the whole 7 years that I've taught undergraduates, which is like if you're scared of doing an exercise that you would assign to your students, or if you just like as a way of being with your students and with language, write with your students, do everything they do, write during their in-class writing. And that's something that I am so glad to have learned from Erica, that I do all the time and think about constantly, and is such a generative space. And to think about the classroom as a generative space for instructors as well as for students is such a cool thing. So Erica, thanks.
Yeah, Erica's had untold influence on all of us in the 9 years we've been together in ModPo. And we talk about pedagogy a lot, and it's appropriate. And also, you know, there's another thing going on, Davey, when you're doing that, which is there's some political action pertaining to the institutionalization of writing as opposed to reading, or reading as opposed to writing. In many English departments, in literature departments in the US and elsewhere, separated. Oh, that's what the creative writers do. You don't want to write in class. And of course, so you're doing all kinds of radical work when you have students write in a reading class. An order has been put in from Dave Poplar for one of those hats. I hope it'll be a unicorn hat, and you better wear it to the next, I don't know how fast it can happen, maybe September. I want to turn to, I'm going to screen share. This is a concrete, I believe, and Derek can correct me if I'm wrong, a series of concrete poems. Derek has done so much. I mean, you got to follow Derek on social media. Where do you mostly post? You have a blog, but you also are on Twitter and Facebook as well. Am I right?
Yeah, mostly Twitter and Facebook. I do have an Instagram account that I use on occasion, but certainly the best place to find my work is on my own website.
Okay, and that's, what's the URL for that?
DerekBeaulieu.wordpress.com.
That's easy. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
just
I have,
look there.
So there's a series of concrete poems that that you have partly posted to your website called Throb, Throb, Throb. And at a certain point a little while ago, you found that Arnold McBay had done an animation of one of them. So what I'd like to do is screen share the animation and invite Derek to comment on it, and then invite anybody here to comment on Derek's comment on, because we haven't talked specifically about concrete poetry, but it's so relevant. And we can't take too long on it because we're going to then do final words. But here is the screen share. Here we go. There it is. Derek, while we're watching this throbbing, throb, 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 I'm going to leave it up as a screen share for a minute or two, and then I'll end it. But in the meantime, would you start talking about it? What's going on here, and why can't I read this?
I'm not sure. I can't read it either. I don't create visual poems as a score for performance. I don't know how to read this out loud, but a lot of folks have played with it. I do see, sound poets responding to this. This piece was originally designed as a static letter-set, rub-down lettering poem. It was not designed, so it was all done by hand. I posted it online, and then Arnie's a friend of mine in St. Catharines, Ontario, who's been taking me up on my proposal that people respond or react or reply to poems. So he often takes my work and then animates them in simple little ways. And in this case, he took it and made it throb, unexpectedly, surprisingly, and brought a new vibe to the poem itself.
Yeah. So it's a concrete poem. Your concrete poems, not always, but often they're alphabetistic. You know, you're interested in font. You're very visual. You're interested in font. You're interested in lettering. So I want to invite a couple of responses to it, starting with Jake. Just, how does concrete poetry fit here? What is this thing about the way letters look? it's very, I guess it's very Russian formalist. I mean, there's a lot going on here, and it's related to chapter to week 10, but we really haven't spelled that out. So Jake, sorry, I call on you cold call, but what do you think?
It was really fun to just look at it. I mean, Derek, your work, I don't know a ton of, but what I've seen and looked at before this session, I really just enjoy the visual look of it, and sometimes it feels like a kind of like almost a meditative experience, and I am definitely trying to close read that thing, and like the word empire was like jumping on me, and we and in. Sorry, I can't. Can you bring it back in for a second?
Yeah, happily.
Because yeah, like the empire, maybe that says something about me, I don't know, but the upper left corner and downward, like we the empire, or the in empire root. I don't know, I just like it. I just want to read it, like sometimes words that are familiar, but also like not real words, or not yet real words. Like I just want to do that. It's inviting and fun.
Max, I'm going to turn to you. So what's interesting about this, Derek, is that you sit at the side of traditional poetry by doing the visual alphabet, and you wind up going over to the other side, to the sound side, because Jake's natural response was to try to sound it out. So you take two traditionally marginal aspects, marginal from the conventional point of view, aspects of poetry, and you bring them together kind of implicitly, which you want to sound it out. Max, a thought on this? What is concrete poetry? What does it have to do with what we've been talking about, if anything?
I mean, just to go back to my earlier comment and what we've been talking about for most of the webcast, it has so much to do with materiality of language, or thinking language as something that is made up of component parts, and not necessarily in this linguistic sense, like of phonemes, morphemes, etc., but thinking of it as thinking of it in terms of type, of the physical act of setting type, of publishing, of paper, of pages, of all of this materiality, this entire material underpinning to language, how we interact with it, how we use it on a daily basis. And that's rather radical implications. It really makes you think about how we're producing this on a daily basis, all the work and even the natural resources that go into it.
Right. Derek, what's going to happen is that we're going to do final thoughts. We're going to go all the way around, but I hope that, and you'll get an extra, everybody's going to have to do it briefly because we're running out of time, and we try to do the final words briefly, but you'll get extended time because you're our guest. And I hope sometime in that final thought, you'll add something about your experience in the community of small press, right, and of communities of poetry that gather around small press, and productions of poetry that clearly care about the look of the type on the page. I would love for you, because that's one of your specialties. And before we get to the final thoughts, I just want to make sure everybody knows, and I'll announce this again to everyone, that tonight at 6 p.m. East Coast time, Philadelphia time, Derek will be reading from his work. I'm really excited about it. I'm going to be hosting and moderating. Derek's going to read for about present for about 35 minutes, and then he and I are going to do a Q&A. We're going to have a colloquy with the audience through the YouTube chat. So please join us. I'll send that link out again at 6 p.m. tonight, hosted by the Kelly Writers House. Okay, so this is going to be like micro-minute final thoughts. We're going to start with Erica and then go to Amber Rose. Final thoughts, Erica, on week 10?
Instead of, I wanted to use my final thought for thanks. So one is to thank Davey, and I'm reminded I haven't been writing with my students lately, and I need to do that. And I also wanted to thank Derek, particularly for the extraordinary work that he makes available through No Press.
Yeah, NO Press. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Erica. We're going to go to Amber Rose, and Dave will be on deck.
My final thought, I just want to maybe give a shout out to the folks that have been commenting on the Facebook thread. There have been some really lovely reflections, which, you know, didn't get to be shared on the webcast, but shout out to y'all for being active. And maybe I just want to end with a question that Mandana posed, which was just, aren't we always in translation, even to ourselves?
That's great. That's Mandana is a Persian, Iranian originally, and thinks about constantly translating herself in that regard. So that's a specific version of the question. Very good. Thank you, Ambrose. Dave and Gabe will be on deck.
Just a quick shout out to Erica Baum's card catalogs, which we didn't get to discuss. I just love that and how it forces you to just get into the mindset of looking for connections and meaning in different places throughout the world. And right now I'm looking at my computer and the keys. The option key is right next to the command key. So I'm thinking, what is my computer trying to tell me about that? So it's just fun to get into that mindset where you can find meaning and connections everywhere.
Yeah, and card catalogs is right up Derek's alley in the sense that the camera catches all the fonts and all the unusual, the kind of an archaeology of letter making, of printing in the card catalog, which is just an incredible adjacent art, I would say. Gabe and Max is on deck.
Yeah, I'll try to make this brief. So to finish what we were saying earlier, there's no concretism and there's no conceptualism without the technologies of writing, the book, the typewriter, setting type, the computer screen, etc. But it also matters a lot for conceptualism that writing and language are international technologies themselves. So even to just say that you write in English means to work with Arabic numerals and a Roman alphabet with Latinate and Germanic morphemes from Indo-European roots. And so I really think that conceptualism is useful when it recognizes the kind of inherently technological and therefore manipulatable aspects of speaking and writing in the world.
That was great. Thank you, Gabe. We're going to turn to, did I say Max was on deck? Yes, Max. And then Derek, you'll be on deck after Max.
I would just encourage people who are unfamiliar with this week, who are watching, to just enjoy it. Check out the things we didn't mention, such as Christian Books Unoya. Some of these, perhaps they didn't enter our discussion today for various reasons, but they're eminently enjoyable. Like you can be skeptical of conceptualism and still enjoy these a lot in a way that perhaps it's a little bit harder in these last weeks of the course. If you're skeptical, you might not enjoy it as much. But here, I think some of these pieces really play on your skepticism, and I think that's so dive in, enjoy it, go to town.
Thank you, Max. Derek, you have the floor for the guest gets a little extended comment, and Allie will be on deck.
Thanks. I want to build on something that both Gabe and Max said. Gabe was talking about the technology of writing, and I think that's, to me, not only something that's very exciting about conceptualism, but also, as you said, about small press. And Max just said, go to town. And to me, small press publishing is authors actually having the opportunity to play, build community, and think about how their writing actually looks. What is the materiality, not just of its construction, but how do you want people to see your writing? How do you want to engage with the tactility of the page, of the size, the scope? And it's actually incredibly, in my opinion, incredibly democratic. If you have a piece of paper and a pencil, you can, write out pieces, you can fold, you can staple. There are so many ways of distributing your work within community and building community, asking for response, that it doesn't need to be any more complicated than you at home, potentially with, or with your friends. And that I think that authors can more and more look at the means of production as inherent as part of the means of writing. Yeah. And that these are ways of really activating what writing can do to assert particular voice.
It's an honor to have had you join us today. And I encourage, what's that?
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for allowing me to join.
It's been great. And it's just, this is the first of 3 sessions we're going to have. We're going to do a Poem Talk recording, which won't be out for a few months, on BP Nickel, 2 BP Nickel. And we're going to be joined by Doug Kearney and Tracy Morris for that. I'm very excited about that. And then, of course, you're reading at 6. I would encourage anybody to go to Derek's Wikipedia page. Apologies for that, but it's a pretty good page. It's got a lot of links. And what you're going to see is a sense of Derek's eminence in the small press Canadian scene for so many years. You're not old, but you've been at it for a long time. And also a great joy. I mean, we saw each other, Anna and Chris and Zach and I were in Montreal a few years ago, at I think literally on the day or the day after you found out that you'd been appointed as the director of the literary arts area at Banff. And that is a major step forward, in my opinion. I totally respect Stephen Smith, who preceded you, but you've really, that was just there was such joy across North American poetics communities that you were being tagged to do it, and you've done such marvelous work. And I feel so terrible that COVID has threatened it in a very serious way, clearly. And we hope that Banff comes back and that people in this group can benefit from time away there. The time that I've spent there has been incredibly productive. So congratulations and thank you, really, on behalf of your American poetic community pals. We're going to turn to Allie. I'm sorry, Derek?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to turn to Allie, followed by Lily.
Just a plug for my office hour, which I believe is the last one on Friday at 2. So come hang out. If there's anything you wanted to talk about over 10 weeks, I'd love to do it, whether you've been there before or you're new to my office hour.
And if you haven't done office hours before, just go to the left side menu, click resources, click office hours, and you'll find Allie. I think it's alphabetical order by first name, so you're near the top.
Actually, I'm at the bottom.
Oh, how did that happen?
I think it's by week, unless they're two different. But
No, it's different. I don't know. Anyway, the subforums are alphabetical. Anyway, find Allie's. And what time is that, Allie?
2 p.m. on Friday.
I'm on Friday. Okay. Lily and Jess is on deck.
Just thinking about form this week in our face-to-face English 88 class, we had a lot of fun talking with students about, for example, the skywritings excerpts that we looked at, what that poem would mean if it wasn't written in airport code format, like if it was just plain text of the words that are sort of being represented by the airport codes. And so the students really had a lot of interesting things to say about that. And it seemed to be a cool way. And for students who were struggling a little bit with the extremely experimental aspects of the work. So I guess if that's useful to help make the importance of the concept this week more visible, to imagine what the work would look like without the concept, that might be a strategy.
That's a great exercise. Yeah, absolutely. Jess and Davey's on deck. And I'm just going to interject that Dave Poplar is accumulating post symposium mode projects. One is the Amber Rose Davey podcast series that we need to get going, although both of them are very busy. The ModPo TA action figures and trading cards. I think I missed that one, but I certainly endorse it. I'm not going to invest in it, though. Don't ask me for money. And Erica's Etsy store. I missed that too, but I told anybody in favor of Erica's Etsy store, you got to quit that fucking job at Bard and start knitting hats. That's what you should be doing. Oh my goodness. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Jess, followed by Davey.
Okay. Quick shout out to Gabe's Canon Challenge video this week, which I thought was tremendous. And like within the video, Gabe refers to an essay, The Delusions of Whiteness in the Avant-Garde by Kathy Park Hong, which was new to me. And it was like a tremendous thing to read. And also very quickly, a reaction to Derek, your poem. It seemed like dancing to me, and I don't know why, but I think there was something about the way that the letters became not letters, but like curves and lines and accents and negative space. And so to me, like as a dancer, that was how I experienced that poem, and it was really cool to encounter that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Davey, final thought. Max, you got a final thought in. Am I missing? Okay, good. I thought I missed you. I usually am pretty good at this. Davey, final thought?
For my final thought, I want to shout out the Global Study Group, which is this week discussing Erica Baum's wonderful recent solo exhibition, A Long Dress. And the conversations they've had about it are really amazing. And as I've done before with my final word, I just think that the work they're doing in the Global Study Group is like a totally amazing model for just like crowdsourced, rigorous discussion that is super insightful and totally accessible and welcoming to everyone. And to see both those things happen at the same time is amazing and so well curated. And you should check it out if you haven't.
Fantastic. Thank you. Chris Martin and Zach Gardner, we're going to be spending some time on final words thanking you guys, but you don't get enough thanks. I mean, what you do, this is pretty unreal, pretty unbelievably good. Not, COVID time, YouTube, Zoom, it's all fucked up, but we do it so smoothly. And the only reason we do it smoothly is that you guys have figured it out. People are coming from around the world to find out how it's done. So don't let it ever, don't ever feel that it goes unnoticed. Thank you to both of you. Thanks to Chris Tids, who called in from the UK. Wasn't that fun? And Alison B, as always, and Stanley from New Mexico, and Ton from Siberia. That was really great. Derek and I will be back at 6 p.m. for the reading. I will make sure that everybody in ModPo gets the link to that. Final Words webcast is at 10:30 on Monday, and I'll be posting a thread for Final Words. So please, whoever you are, wherever you are, post a final thought about ModPo 2020. We want to hear it. And finally, once again, Derek, thank you for being our guest. You were wonderful. Really enjoyed it. Thank you all. Thank you. And sorry we ran a little long, but we hope you stayed, and we'll see you on Monday, if not tonight, at 6 p.m. Bye.